the chair of memories, a place to gather. The Florida sun pressed against the windows of Mabel's hair haven like an old friend asking to come in. Inside the small salon, the air conditioner hummed its steady tune, mixing with the gentle buzz of conversation and the familiar scent of lavender shampoo. Mabel Greene wiped her hands on her pink apron and smiled at the sight before her. 3 styling chairs sat in a neat row, each one a throne where stories were born. The walls wore a soft peach color that Mabel had chosen because it made everyone's skin look younger. Framed photos of her clients dotted the space: birthday parties, grandchildren's graduations, anniversary celebrations. This wasn't just a hair salon. It was the heart of Sunset Gardens' retirement community. "Morning, Mabel," Bob Henderson called out as he pushed through the glass door. His silver hair stuck up in 3 different directions, and his reading glasses hung from a chain around his neck. "I look like I wrestled with my pillow and lost." Mabel chuckled and patted the back of her favorite chair. "Come on over, Bob. I'll fix you right up." Bob was her first customer of the day, just like he had been every Saturday for the past 2 years. He settled into the chair with a grateful sigh and closed his eyes as Mabel draped the cape around his shoulders. "How's retirement treating you?" she asked, running her fingers through his unruly hair. "Can't complain," Bob said, "though I do miss those kids sometimes. 35 years of teaching high school history, and now I don't know what to do with all these facts rattling around in my head." Mabel picked up her scissors and began to snip. "Well, you know what I always say. A good story never goes to waste." Bob's eyes lit up in the mirror. "Speaking of stories, did I ever tell you about the time I took my class to Washington, D.C.? I don't believe you did." Mabel had learned that the best part of her job wasn't cutting hair. It was listening. "It was 1987, Bob began, settling deeper into his chair. 23 kids, all of them convinced they knew everything. We were touring the Capitol building, and this one boy, Jimmy Rodriguez, he was always getting into trouble. Well, we're standing in the rotunda, and the tour guide is talking about the history of the building. Jimmy raises his hand and asks, 'How do they clean way up there?' pointing to the dome. Mabel smiled as she worked, creating Bob's usual neat part. "The guy didn't know what to say," Bob continued. "But Jimmy wasn't done. He says, 'My mom makes me dust the ceiling fan at home. I bet they need a really big ladder.'" The whole group started laughing, even the security guards. That boy turned a boring tour into something special just by asking the right question. "Children see things we miss sometimes," Mabel said, brushing the loose hair from Bob's neck. "They do indeed. Jimmy went on to become an architect, you know. Designed a whole community center back in Ohio. Sometimes the troublemakers surprise you the most." Mabel removed the cape and handed Bob a small mirror to check the back of his head. He nodded approvingly. "Looks perfect as always," he said, reaching for his wallet. "Same time next week?" Mabel asked. "Wouldn't miss it." Bob paused at the door. "You know, Mabel, I've been thinking. You collect all these stories from us old folks. Maybe we should make it official somehow." "What do you mean?" "A storytelling circle. Every Saturday, people could share memories while you work your magic. This place already feels like home. Why not make it a real gathering spot?" After Bob left, Mabel stood in her quiet salon and considered his words. The idea warmed her heart like the Florida sunshine. She had always believed that everyone had at least one good story to tell. Maybe it was time to find out just how many stories lived in the hearts of her neighbors. She looked around at her small kingdom, the 3 chairs, the soft lighting, the photos on the walls. Yes, this could work. This could be something beautiful. Stories began to flow. The following Saturday, Mabel placed a small chalkboard by her front door. In her careful handwriting, she had written, "Saturday Storytelling Circle, share a memory while you share your chair." Her first appointment was Dorothy Winters, a retired librarian with snow-white hair that she wore in an elegant bun. Dorothy read the sign and raised an eyebrow. "A storytelling circle?" she asked as she settled into the chair. "What exactly did you have in mind, dear?" "Just what it says," Mabel replied, beginning to brush Dorothy's long hair. "If you'd like to share a memory while I fix your hair, I'd love to listen. No pressure, of course." Dorothy studied her reflection in the mirror. "Well, I suppose I have a story or two." She paused as Mabel began to pin up sections of her hair. "Did you know I once met a famous author?" "You did? Tell me about it." "It was 1962, Dorothy began, her voice taking on the tone she had used for countless story times. "I was working at the public library in Tallahassee. A man came in asking for a quiet place to write. He was tall and thin, with kind eyes and ink stains on his fingers. Said he was working on a children's book." Mabel carefully trimmed the ends of Dorothy's hair, encouraging her to continue with gentle nods. "He came in every Tuesday for months. Always sat at the same table by the window. The children loved him. He would tell them stories during their lunch breaks. One day he handed me a manuscript and said, 'Thank you for giving me a place to dream.' It was his book, and he had dedicated it to Dorothy and all the librarians who make magic possible." "What was the book?" Mabel asked. Dorothy's eyes sparkled. "It went on to win several awards. But you know what? The thing I remember most isn't the fame or the dedication. It's watching him with those children, seeing how he listened to their ideas and wove them into his stories. He taught me that everyone has something important to say." As Mabel styled Dorothy's hair into its usual elegant twist, she felt a familiar warmth in her chest. This was exactly what Bob had been talking about. Their next visitor was Frank Castellano, a retired mechanic whose thick hands told stories of their own. Frank had moved to Sunset Gardens 6 months ago after his wife passed away, and he usually kept to himself. "What's this about storytelling?" he asked gruffly, eyeing the chalkboard. "Just sharing memories if you feel like it," Mabel said. "Dorothy was just telling me about meeting a famous author." Frank grunted and sat down heavily. His gray hair needed more than a trim. It needed attention and care, which Mabel was happy to provide. "I'm not much of a talker," he said. "That's perfectly fine." Mabel began washing his hair, letting the warm water and gentle massage work their magic. "Sometimes it's nice just to sit quietly." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes. Then Frank's shoulders relaxed, and he began to speak. "I had a customer once," he said slowly. "Young woman, maybe 25. Drove this beat-up old Buick that belonged to her grandmother. Car was falling apart, but she couldn't afford a new one." Mabel continued her work, saying nothing. "She was a nurse at the children's hospital," Frank continued. "Worked double shifts to pay for her little boy's medicine. That Buick broke down every other week, and every time she'd bring it to my shop with tears in her eyes, worried about the cost." Frank's voice grew softer. "One day, she came in crying harder than usual. Said she might have to quit her job because she couldn't rely on the car anymore. So I did something I'd never done before." "What was that?" "I fixed her car for free. Not just that visit, every visit for 3 years until she could afford something better. Told her it was a payment plan, but I never sent a bill." Mabel moved to cut Frank's hair, working carefully around his weathered face. "That was a beautiful thing to do. She sent me a card every Christmas until I closed the shop. Pictures of her boy growing up, updates about her nursing career. Last card I got, she had become head nurse at that hospital." Frank's eyes met Mabel's in the mirror. Sometimes fixing cars was about more than cars. When Frank left, he paused at the door just like Bob had the week before. "Same time next week?" he asked. Mabel nodded. "I'll be here." As the afternoon wore on, more clients arrived. Each one read the chalkboard with curiosity, and each one left with a lighter step. Martha Sullivan told about her victory garden during World War II. James Chan shared the story of meeting his wife at a USO dance in 1953. Agnes Murphy recounted the day she adopted her first rescue dog. With each story, Mabel felt her small salon growing larger. The walls seemed to expand to hold all the memories being shared. The mirrors reflected not just faces, but lifetimes of experiences. As she swept up the last of the day's hair clippings, Mabel realized that Bob had been right. This wasn't just about haircuts anymore. It was about something much more important. It was about remembering that every person who walked through her door carried a treasure chest of stories, and all they needed was someone willing to listen. An unwelcome silence. The third Saturday of Mabel's storytelling circle brought an unexpected challenge. At 10 o'clock sharp, a woman Mabel had never seen before pushed through the glass door. She was tall and thin, with steel gray hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. Her dark eyes swept the salon like she was looking for an escape route. "I need a haircut," the woman said in a clipped voice. "Nothing fancy." "Of course," Mabel replied warmly. "I'm Mabel Greene. You must be new to Sunset Gardens." "Carmen Alvarez," the woman said, settling stiffly into the chair. She stared straight ahead in the mirror, avoiding eye contact. Mabel draped the cape around Mrs. Alvarez's shoulders and noticed how tense they were. "How long have you been in Florida?" "2 weeks." "Where did you move from?" "New Jersey." The answers came like gunshots, quick, sharp, and final. Mabel tried a different approach. "That's quite a change. I bet you're still getting used to the heat." Mrs. Alvarez simply nodded. As Mabel began to brush her client's hair, she noticed it was beautiful, thick and silver with natural waves that wanted to curl. But it had been neglected, cut roughly and without care. "Your hair has lovely natural curl," Mabel said gently. "We could work with that if you'd like. Just cut it short." Mabel glanced at the chalkboard by the door and wondered if she should mention the storytelling circle. Something in Mrs. Alvarez's rigid posture warned her away from the subject. Just then, Bob Henderson arrived for his weekly appointment. He took one look at the chalkboard and beamed. "Mabel, this storytelling idea of yours is the talk of the community. Everyone's excited about." He stopped when he noticed Mrs. Alvarez in the chair. "Oh, sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt." "Bob Henderson," he said cheerfully, extending his hand to Mrs. Alvarez. "Retired high school history teacher. Welcome to Sunset Gardens." Mrs. Alvarez looked at his outstretched hand but didn't take it. "Carmen Alvarez." An uncomfortable silence filled the salon. Bob lowered his hand, his smile faltering slightly. "Well," he said, settling into one of the waiting chairs, "I'll just wait my turn." Mabel worked on Mrs. Alvarez's hair in the heavy quiet, each snip of the scissors sounding too loud. She tried to think of something to say, some way to ease the tension, but every topic that came to mind seemed wrong. When Dorothy Winters arrived 10 minutes later, she immediately sensed the uncomfortable atmosphere. Dorothy had spent 40 years as a librarian, dealing with shy children and difficult patrons. She tried her usual approach. "Good morning," she said pleasantly to Mrs. Alvarez. "I don't think we've met. I'm Dorothy Winters." Mrs. Alvarez met her eyes in the mirror for just a moment, then looked away. "Carmen Alvarez, are you settling in well?" "Fine." Dorothy exchanged a glance with Bob. Both of them were used to the warm, chatty atmosphere of Mabel's salon. This felt wrong, like a discordant note in a favorite song. Mabel finished cutting Mrs. Alvarez's hair, working faster than usual. She had given up trying to convince her to keep the natural curl and had cut it into a sensible, short style. It looked nice, but Mabel couldn't shake the feeling that she had missed an opportunity to do something beautiful. "How's that?" she asked, holding up a hand mirror. Mrs. Alvarez examined her reflection with the same stony expression. "It's fine. How much do I owe you?" Mabel told her the price, and Mrs. Alvarez paid exactly, without a tip. As she headed for the door, Dorothy made one last attempt at friendliness. "We have a lovely book club here at Sunset Gardens," she said. "Meets every Thursday evening in the community room. You'd be welcome to join us." Mrs. Alvarez paused with her hand on the door handle. For just a moment, something flickered in her dark eyes. Longing, maybe, or regret. Then it was gone. "I don't read much anymore," she said, and walked out into the bright Florida sunshine. The silence that followed felt heavier than the one before. Bob cleared his throat. "Tough nut to crack," he said, trying for lightness. "Now, Bob," Dorothy scolded gently, "we don't know what she's been through. Moving here at our age isn't easy. She might just need time." Mabel nodded, but she felt unsettled as she prepared for Bob's haircut. The salon had become a place of warmth and sharing, where stories flowed like water. Mrs. Alvarez's silence had felt like a stone dropped into that stream, disrupting the natural flow. As she worked on Bob's hair, listening to his cheerful chatter about a new book he was reading, Mabel's mind kept drifting to Mrs. Alvarez. There had been something in her eyes during that brief moment, a sadness so deep it made Mabel's heart ache. Everyone had a story to tell. Mabel believed that with all her heart. But what do you do when someone's story is locked away behind walls of silence? How do you reach someone who doesn't want to be reached? The questions followed her through the rest of the day, even as her regular clients filled the salon with laughter and memories. Something had changed in her little haven, and Mabel wasn't sure how to fix it. That evening, as she locked up the salon, she found herself hoping that Mrs. Alvarez would give them another chance. But deep down, she had a feeling that wouldn't happen anytime soon. Chapter 4: Breaking Through. For the next 2 Saturdays, Mrs. Alvarez didn't return. Mabel found herself looking toward the door every few minutes, hoping to see that familiar stern figure. When she mentioned it to Bob, he just shrugged. "Some people prefer the chain salon at the mall," he said. "More anonymous." But Mabel couldn't shake the feeling that she had failed somehow. She kept thinking about that moment when Mrs. Alvarez had paused at the door, the brief flicker of something vulnerable in her eyes. On the 3rd Saturday, Mabel was trimming Agnes Murphy's curls when the door chimed. She looked up to see Mrs. Alvarez standing in the doorway, her face as expressionless as before. "I need another trim," she said simply. "Of course," Mabel replied, trying to keep the relief out of her voice. "I'll be with you in just a few minutes." Mrs. Alvarez took a seat in the corner, as far from the other clients as possible. Agnes, bless her heart, tried to include her in the conversation. "I was just telling Mabel about my grandson's wedding," Agnes said. "Such a beautiful ceremony. Do you have grandchildren, dear?" Mrs. Alvarez's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "No." Agnes, undeterred by the short answer, continued. "Well, children today have such different ideas about weddings. This one was on a beach. Can you imagine? Sand and everything, and the poor bride's dress." "I said no," Mrs. Alvarez interrupted, her voice sharp. "No grandchildren. No children. No family." The salon fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioner. Agnes's cheeks flushed pink with embarrassment. "Oh," she said softly. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "Forget it," Mrs. Alvarez muttered, but Mabel caught the slight tremor in her voice. Mabel finished Agnes's hair quickly and walked her to the door. Agnes whispered an apology as she left, and Mabel squeezed her hand reassuringly. When she turned back, Mrs. Alvarez was already settling into the styling chair, staring straight ahead in the mirror. Mabel draped the cape around her shoulders and noticed that her hands were shaking slightly. "The usual trim?" Mabel asked gently. Mrs. Alvarez nodded. As Mabel began to work, she found herself studying her client's reflection. The woman's face was like a mask, carefully composed to reveal nothing. But her eyes, Mabel had learned to read eyes over the years. Her eyes held a pain so deep it seemed bottomless. They worked in silence for several minutes. Then, without warning, Mrs. Alvarez spoke. I had a daughter once. Mabel's hands stilled for just a moment, then resumed their gentle rhythm. She didn't respond, sensing that any words might shatter the fragile moment. Maria, Mrs. Alvarez continued, her voice barely above a whisper. She would have been 43 next month. The past tense hit Mabel like a physical blow, but she kept her expression neutral, her hands steady. She used to love having her hair brushed, Mrs. Alvarez said. When she was little, she would climb into my lap every night before bed, and I would brush her long, dark hair while she told me about her day at school. Mabel set down her scissors and picked up a soft brush, running it gently through Mrs. Alvarez's silver hair. The woman's eyes closed, and for the first time since Mabel had met her, her face relaxed. She became a teacher, Mrs. Alvarez whispered. 3rd grade. She said the children reminded her of herself at that age, full of questions and dreams. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She never got to have children of her own. The cancer came too fast. Mabel's own eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. This wasn't about her grief. It was about Mrs. Alvarez's need to finally speak. I sold everything in New Jersey, Mrs. Alvarez continued. The house where she grew up, her things, all of it. I couldn't bear to look at any of it anymore. Thought if I moved somewhere completely different, somewhere she had never been, maybe the pain would be less. She opened her eyes and met Mabel's gaze in the mirror. But it followed me here. It follows me everywhere. Mabel set down the brush and placed a gentle hand on Mrs. Alvarez's shoulder. Grief doesn't have a forwarding address, she said softly. It knows where to find us no matter where we go. Mrs. Alvarez's composure finally cracked. She covered her face with her hands and sobbed deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from the very center of her being. Mabel moved around the chair and knelt beside her, offering tissues and a steady presence. I miss her so much, Mrs. Alvarez whispered between sobs. I miss her laugh, her voice on the phone every Sunday, the way she would call me Mommy when she was excited about something. I miss the woman she was becoming, the life she'll never have. Mabel stayed with her until the tears subsided, then helped her clean up her face with gentle pats of a cool towel. I'm sorry, Mrs. Alvarez said, embarrassed. I didn't mean to fall apart like that. Don't you dare apologize, Mabel said firmly. Grief isn't something you should carry alone. Mrs. Alvarez looked at her reflection in the mirror, red-eyed, vulnerable, but somehow more real than she had looked before. I don't know how to be around people anymore, she admitted. Maria was my whole world for 40 years. Without her, I don't know who I am. Mabel resumed styling her hair, working with extra care. Maybe you don't have to figure it all out at once, she said. Maybe you just have to take it one day at a time, one conversation at a time. When she finished, Mrs. Alvarez's hair looked beautiful, soft and silver, with gentle waves that framed her face. Mabel had worked with a natural curl this time, and the result was elegant but not severe. It's lovely, Mrs. Alvarez said, touching a silver wave tentatively. It suits you, Mabel replied. Maria would have thought so too. For the first time since walking into the salon, Mrs. Alvarez smiled. It was small and sad, but it was genuine. She would have, she agreed. She always said I was too hard on myself, too afraid to be beautiful. As Mrs. Alvarez prepared to leave, she paused at the door just as Bob and Dorothy had done weeks before. Same time next week? She asked. I'll be here, Mabel promised. After she left, Mabel sat alone in her salon, surrounded by the familiar sense of shampoo and the lingering echo of shared pain. She thought about Maria, the daughter she would never meet, and the stories that lived on in her mother's heart. Everyone had a story to tell. Some were harder to share than others, but they were all worth hearing. Today, Mabel had learned that sometimes the most important stories were the ones wrapped in tears. Chapter 5: A Circle Complete. The following Saturday brought the warmest October morning Mabel could remember. She arrived early at the salon, taking extra time to arrange fresh flowers, bright orange marigolds that Dorothy had brought from her small garden plot. The flowers reminded her of Maria somehow, though she couldn't say exactly why. Mrs. Alvarez arrived exactly on time, looking different than Mabel had ever seen her. She wore a soft blue blouse instead of her usual gray, and she had taken care with her silver hair, styling it the way Mabel had shown her the week before. "Good morning, Carmen," Mabel said, using her first name for the first time. "Good morning," Carmen replied, and there was something warmer in her voice. As Mabel began her work, Carmen surprised her by speaking first. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, "about taking things one conversation at a time. Oh, I called my neighbor back in New Jersey, Mrs. Patterson. She was Maria's kindergarten teacher years ago." Carmen's voice grew stronger as she spoke. "We talked for 2 hours. She told me stories about Maria that I had never heard. How she used to organize the playground during recess. How she always made sure the shy children had someone to sit with at lunch." Mabel smiled as she worked, carefully shaping Carmen's hair. "That sounds like something a born teacher would do. Mrs. Patterson said Maria talked about me sometimes. Told the other teachers that her mother was the strongest woman she knew because I raised her by myself after her father left." Carmen's voice caught slightly. "I never knew she saw it that way. I always felt like I was failing her, working so many jobs, never having enough time. Children see love even when we think we're falling short," Mabel said gently. The door chimed and Bob Henderson walked in, followed by Dorothy. They both greeted Carmen warmly, and this time she responded with genuine friendliness. "How are you settling in?" Dorothy asked as she took a seat. "Better," Carmen said simply. "It's an adjustment, but I'm starting to appreciate the sunshine." Bob chuckled. "Takes about 6 months to stop missing snow. By Christmas, you'll be like the rest of us, complaining when it drops below 70 degrees. Carmen actually smiled at that. "Maria used to tease me about being cold-blooded. She said I'd bundle up when it hit 60 degrees in Jersey." The mention of her daughter's name came easier now, without the sharp pain of the week before. Mabel noticed Bob and Dorothy exchange a quick glance of understanding. "Tell us about her," Dorothy said gently. "What was she like?" Carmen looked surprised by the request, but after a moment she began to speak. "She was sunshine," she said simply. "Even as a baby, she was always laughing, always curious about everything. She learned to read when she was 4. Just picked up a book one day and started reading to me. I thought I was imagining it at first." "A natural teacher," Bob said approvingly. "Those are rare gifts." She was. Her students adored her. Every year, she would get letters from children she had taught years before. She kept every single one. Carmen's eyes grew distant. "After the funeral, some of her former students came to see me. Teenagers now, but they remembered her so clearly. One boy told me that Maria had taught him to read when everyone else had given up on him. He's in college now, studying to be a teacher himself." "What a beautiful legacy," Dorothy said softly. "I never thought of it that way," Carmen admitted. "I was so focused on what she wouldn't get to do. Get married, have children, grow old with someone who loved her. But you're right. She lives on in all those children she taught." As Mabel put the finishing touches on Carmen's hair, the salon filled with the comfortable warmth of shared understanding. Frank Castellano arrived for his appointment, gruff as always but with a gentleness around the edges that Mabel had grown to appreciate. "Afternoon, ladies," he said, nodding to the group. "Bob, how's that book you were telling me about?" "Fascinating stuff," Bob replied. "It's about the home front during World War II. Made me think of my mother. She worked in a factory making airplane parts." "My mother too," Carmen said quietly. "She riveted wing sections at a plant in Newark. She always said those were the most important years of her life, not because of the war, but because she discovered she could do things she never thought possible. Maria's fighting spirit came from somewhere, Dorothy observed. Carmen nodded. When the doctors told her about the cancer, she asked how long she had and what she could accomplish in that time. She worked right up until the last month, determined to finish the school year for her students. Frank cleared his throat gruffly. Sounds like she was raised right. She raised herself mostly, Carmen said. I just tried to stay out of her way and provide the love. Sometimes that's the most important job there is, Mabel said, stepping back to admire her work. Carmen's hair looked beautiful, soft, and elegant, framing her face in a way that made her look younger and more approachable. As the afternoon progressed, more clients arrived, and gradually, Carmen found herself at the center of conversations instead of on the edges. She shared stories about Maria's childhood, laughed at Bob's recollections of difficult students, and even offered to help Dorothy with the library's book sale next month. When the day was winding down and Carmen was preparing to leave, she paused at the familiar spot by the door. But instead of asking about next week's appointment, she turned to face the group. I want to thank all of you, she said, her voice steady but emotional. For the past year since Maria died, I felt like I was disappearing. Like without her, I didn't exist anymore. But sitting here today talking about her, sharing her stories, it feels like she's still here somehow. Like she's still part of the world. Dorothy stood and walked over to Carmen, pulling her into a gentle hug. She is still here, she said firmly. In you and the students she taught, in the love you shared. Death can't touch that. Carmen hugged her back, and Mabel saw tears in both women's eyes. Not the desperate tears of raw grief, but the softer tears of healing. Would you like to come to book club this Thursday? Dorothy asked. We're reading a novel about mothers and daughters. I think you might enjoy it. Carmen hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. I'd like that very much. As the salon emptied and Mabel began her end-of-day cleanup, she reflected on what she had witnessed. The storytelling circle had become something more than she had ever imagined. Not just a place to share memories, but a place where people could find their way back to themselves. She thought about Maria, the daughter she would never meet, but who had touched her life through her mother's stories. She thought about the invisible threads that connected all their stories: love, loss, hope, and the courage to keep going. Outside, the Florida sun was setting in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Mabel locked up the salon and headed home, knowing that next Saturday would bring new stories, new connections, and new proof that everyone, no matter how guarded or grief-stricken, had something beautiful to share. The chair of memories had become exactly what Bob had envisioned, a gathering place where stories lived and love multiplied. And Carmen Alvarez, with her silver hair and her precious memories of Maria, had become an essential part of that circle. Some stories, Mabel reflected, were worth waiting for. Epilogue: the stories continue. 6 months later, Mabel's Hair Haven had become the unofficial heart of Sunset Gardens' retirement community. The Saturday storytelling circle had grown beyond the salon itself. Residents often continued their conversations over lunch in the community dining room or during evening walks around the pond. Carmen Alvarez had become one of Mabel's most regular customers, arriving early each Saturday to help arrange the chairs and brew the special herbal tea that had become the circle's signature offering. Her silver hair now curved in gentle waves that caught the light, and she wore colors that Maria would have chosen for her: soft blues and lavenders that made her dark eyes shine. On this particular Saturday morning in March, Carmen was setting out teacups when she noticed a new resident hovering outside the salon's front door. The woman looked to be in her 70s, with short auburn hair and nervous hands that clutched a small purse. "Can I help you?" Carmen asked, stepping outside. "I heard about the storytelling group," the woman said hesitantly. "I'm Eleanor Walsh. I just moved here from Maine, and I don't really know anyone yet." Carmen smiled warmly. the same smile that Maria used to give to shy students on their first day of school. "I'm Carmen Alvarez," she said, extending her hand. "I was new here once too, not so long ago. Would you like to come in?" Mabel makes everyone feel welcome. Eleanor's shoulders relaxed slightly. "I don't know if I have any stories worth telling." Carmen's eyes twinkled with understanding. "Trust me," she said, gently guiding Eleanor toward the door. "Everyone has stories worth telling. Sometimes we just need the right people to listen." As they walked into the warm, lavender-scented salon, Carmen caught sight of herself in the mirror. She looked different than she had that first day she'd come for a haircut. Not just her hair, which was styled with care, or her clothes, which had regained their color. The change was deeper than that. She looked like someone who knew her place in the world again. Mabel looked up from preparing her station and beamed at the sight of Eleanor. "Welcome to our little circle," she said warmly. "I'm Mabel Greene. What brings you to Florida?" Eleanor glanced nervously at Carmen, who gave her an encouraging nod. "My husband passed away last year," Eleanor said quietly. "Our children thought I should be closer to people my age in a warmer climate. But honestly, I feel so lost without him. We were married for 52 years. Carmen reached out and squeezed Eleanor's hand. "Grief is a journey," she said gently, "but you don't have to travel it alone." Bob Henderson pushed through the door at that moment, followed by Dorothy, Frank, and several other regular members of the circle. They all greeted Eleanor with genuine warmth, and within minutes, she was settled in a chair with a cup of tea, looking less like a lost stranger and more like someone who might belong. As Mabel began working on Eleanor's hair, she asked the question that had become the circle's gentle ritual. "Would you like to share a memory with us today?" Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't the desperate tears of early grief. They were the softer tears of someone ready to remember love instead of just loss. "Harry and I met at a USO dance in 1969, she began, her voice growing stronger. "I was wearing my grandmother's blue dress, and he was the worst dancer I'd ever seen." Carmen listened to Eleanor's story and felt the familiar warmth of recognition. Another chapter was beginning in the ongoing story of Mabel's hair haven. Another heart was finding its way home. She thought of Maria as she did every day, but now the memories brought smiles more often than tears. Her daughter lived on in the love Carmen shared with others, in the comfort she offered to newcomers like Eleanor, and in the stories that connected one heart to another. Outside the windows, the Florida sun painted everything in gold, and inside the salon, the circle grew larger once again. Stories flowed like water, healing like time, and connecting them all in the beautiful, unbreakable chain of human experience. "Mabel,"